Right, July, middle of July. This thing is growing like crazy. Let's get a haircut and get this styled. I meant the tree, not me. Let's take a look at this olive. This olive has now been with me for about a year. I repotted it. It has grown well. It has established itself in the pot. It is really, really nice and stable. And now I am about to go and give it a style. And that is what this video is about, styling an olive tree. Now there is a couple of things that you need to keep in mind. And one of the most important things is, of course, what is the front of the tree? So the front of a tree, ideally you have a nice taper in the trunk, which I have on this side. Which I don't have from this side, but naturally if you flip it around another 90 degrees, this also has nice taper. The root flare is going to be moi. In repotting I saw that it was just a tree that had cut at the trunk line, planted, and has just very fine roots. So there's not a lot of nice nabari work going on here. So the apex of the tree, you basically want to move a little bit forward. This mimics you standing in front of a big tree, looking up, and you're like, wow, look at that big tree. If the tree walks away from you, then it looks a little bit odd. Now we are in luck because here the trunk is fairly straight. This could be a tip. It is a little bit in the front of the trunk, but also if you turn it around, and there we go again. Here is another tip, potential tip. Then we look at interesting features of the trunk. One interesting feature here is that there has been a big root cut at this point. There's a biggish cut here, and there's a very big cut here. All three of these will need work to look more natural. Now it just looks like a cut trunk. So if we now look at this potential front, this cut side, and that cut side are all quite prominently present. I don't see anything special here except for there's a little bit of rough bark on this side. So that might make this a good front. And actually the trunk is a little bit hollow. So it also embraces you as a trunk. If we look at the other side, also nice. Actually nicer because there's a big cut now here in the back. You don't see it anymore from this side. This big branch is also to the back, and this is a smaller branch, which is nice. It has a small extension here that I could use as a canopy. There are a few smaller cuts here, but they are not as prominent as the very big one here. And this I could actually carve down considerably. If I carve it all the way here and I just leave these branches, then you have a very nice natural taper and movement in this trunk. Then it goes from this tip, have a canopy here, move the trunk this direction, move the trunk back and out. Very nice big tapered base, narrower, moving into the crown. So let me draw this out a little bit for you. It's always a good idea to make a little sketch of the tree that you're going to grow. Comes back out. Then we have this smaller branch here, and we have this bigger branch going to the back. And here it goes down first a little bit, outward, and then into the pot. Right. Now if we say we make a pad here at the first, nice and large, then here we also make one. The top will have a canopy like this. This I'm going to carve down. And here there's going to be a pad that probably will extend much further than I have now. So that is roughly what I have in mind now for the tree. This of course could make a nice front branch that sits roughly around here, and you'd fill it up here. And in the back there's got a few branches as well, and one of them could be positioned here to have a little bit of depth. And of course here when this trunk is gone you can see that here. And all of these pads can of course consist of more than one pad, right? Just have to see how I break that up. But I start off with now taking branches, one or two at each of these locations, and wiring them in position to later on carry these pads. This is going to be drastic. And I know I've been getting comments on my videos that I have a skill at killing trees. And really that is not what I'm trying to do. I'm really trying to just style the tree and it will bounce back quite quickly. We're in the middle of summer. The olives have just started to get their second wind, their second push of the season. So what I'm doing now, I'm just thinning out so it can backbud effectively. So pretty much the pruning is done. The length might be reduced, but I think I'm going to use pretty much all of these branches, except for some that are here at this back trunk. But now, before I start wiring, I think it is wise to first carve a bit of the deadwood. Olive wood can get really hard when it is dead and dried, but when it is still alive, it is quite easy to work with. On top of that, if I do it now, I've not wired the branches, so there's no risk of pushing them out of place. And also, later on, the wires can go exactly where I want them to go and can stay there without having to move when I'm carving it. I am afraid, though, it is already quite late in the day, so I don't really want to bother my neighbors now with a big carving tool. I'm going to do this tomorrow and I'll continue this video. Now, I know what I said yesterday. I was going to do this with power tools, but I've decided to not use the power tools unless I really have to. And the reason is quite simply, if you use a power tool, it will grind away the wood without looking at the fibers in the wood. So I'm going to see what can I do the old-fashioned way. Hammer away at it. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take a knife, I'm going to cut a line in the bark where I want it to stop. You can see a very nice fold line here in the bark, and I want to use that as a guide as to where it will stop. That way later on it will look naturally, because the bark has already gone over the edge a little bit. So now with the bark cut off, there's less risk of the bark just pulling down and taking sections away, and I can start tapping away at the wood, slowly removing small sections. And of course, having pliers is also useful if you get small pieces that you scrap and you want to pull out fiber by fiber. This way I can leave little stumps like these and use them in the final design, but remove most of the wood here so it looks a lot lighter. This is a long, slow process, but ideally this way you see the fibers much better, the structure of the wood, and it looks more natural. So in the end I decided to leave quite a bit of a stump. I can always remove more later, right? But this is the first tiling. I've shortened these stumps a little bit. More work will be done to them later on. But for now I'm just going to wire them out. I've got 1.5 and 2 millimeters of aluminium wire, and that should be sufficient for these branches. And I'll just put them in place. Maybe shorten them a little bit to encourage backbudding. Right now what I've done, I've made this the back branch. This is going to be the primary branch, but it needs to grow taller. It needs to go up to here. That way you also get better callousing here. This I might have to carve out a little bit deeper. But first I want these branches to take, so the scar doesn't get too big. And for the rest of it, I think it is wired, it is done. This is now going to go back into the garden. It will get a little bit of a hit because of all the hammering. So another week has passed, and what you can see now is that the tips here, they've started to grow. In fact, here along this whole branch, there's new growth. Now a little trick when it comes to an olive, if you want it to get to back bud, if you remove the growing tip, and then you remove alternatingly here and there leaves, then the places where you remove the leaf, the bud will be triggered to start growing. And you get side branches. And I'm going to let it grow for the season, and let's take a look what it looks like at the end of the season. It's now the end of August, a few more weeks have passed, and there's a few things that I've noticed. And as I was editing the video and I got a very good frontal view of the tree, I realized this branch here in the back really is an eyesore. In the original design I already said that branch had to go. Why didn't I do that straight away as I was working on the tree? So this is something, a learning moment for me, but also for you. From a camera perspective, you get a much better two-dimensional projection of the tree, and therefore you see much clearer which elements are still missing. So I'm going to cut this off now. Then I'm going to prune off all these little its and bits and pieces that are coming up. Basically all these suckers. And I can just pull them off with my hands, right? Just like that. Because I just want the primary branches that I put in place to grow. I'm not going to prune back all these long stalks that are developing. I want this tree to power up. I'm going to leave a little bit of a stump that I can later on make deadwood out of. So I'm just going to go and create a perpendicular cut right there. Doesn't that look a lot better? Now, of course, there is a little bit of space here that needs to be filled, but I am pretty sure that over time there'll be something popping somewhere here in the back that can fill the space here a little bit more. Do you like content like this? Have you subscribed? If not, consider subscribing. Leave me a comment and hit the like button. Thanks. It's early spring, and what you can see is that this olive is starting to push growth everywhere. Over winter I have unwired some of these branches as it was starting to bite in. Some others are still wired, but I'm going to take the wire off in a minute. But more importantly, this growth here. Everywhere on the trunk you get now young sprouts starting to form, and I'm going to remove all of those. Removing those means that other growing tips relatively get stronger. Right now these branches are bent down, and for the trees that is a sign. These branches are old, they're aging, they're hanging down. These are not the ones to invest in. The ones that you want to invest in are the ones that go up. Or if there are no branches that go up, we will create some branches that grow up and therefore get a lot stronger. Now I don't want those. I'm going to remove them. Early June. It has been very wet and very cool. And oddly enough, look at how this has responded. It is again full of little sprouts here on the trunk, and continuously you need to rub these off. They won't disappear by itself. Then what I'm also seeing, growth here on top is quite strong, as expected of course. Here at the bottom it is okay, but it is not really strong. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to prune back a little bit here on top, particularly these long extensions that are on here. Then I'm going to wire out some of these extensions that I want to keep, but I don't want to keep too many because it's going to be quite easy to fill this up on top. I first want to fill the bottom, and after doing that, I'm just going to take a little bit of wire and also here wire out some of these extensions. Now after removing all this unwanted growth from the trunk, it is time to start looking at the branches. And you see that there's long branches here that are really extending, and there's branches that are growing vertical. And the vertical ones, This is actually not a three-way split that I thought. It is a two-way split and a vertical one a little bit further in the back. I'm just going to prune a little bit back. This vertical one as well. Then the ones that are growing horizontal I'm going to leave. This one I'm going to wire because I want this to fill. Here's another vertical one, but in this case it's a two-way split and I can just wire it out just like this so it fills this space. Now, as mentioned before, some of these branches have come back up and I will add a few tension wires to keep them in place, but most of them have actually done quite well. Here, this is a very long branch in the back on the stump where I removed the branch. I'm going to try and wire that out, and I'm using the front branches here and this piece of deadwood to stabilize the wire. So I'm going over, around, and then I'm picking one of these two branches and I'll wire that one out so that it's nice and stable and I can position it. But more importantly, I'm going around and over. Removing a few leaves is not bad. It will stimulate budding. But now I can hopefully bend this wire and with that the branch to the back. Yeah, that works perfectly well. Let me wire out the whole branch. And now here I need to pay attention because there's multiple side branches and I need to check which ones I'm going to keep and whether I can bend the branch in a way that they are really more or less horizontal. Then of course, once you have wired this whole branch and you start to bend the branch itself, bend in a way that you have a little bit of movement in the branch, but also that the side branches that you are keeping are actually on the outside. So this one is on the outside. Now this one is also on the outside. I can remove this one, make it a bit more extreme. Bend back, remove the one on the other side. And then I also create this left-right pattern right in branches that I keep and ones that I remove. Just like this, and then trying to wire the tip up because I want this branch to extend quite a lot in thickness. And I can bring it up a little bit more and then to the back so it really becomes something that fills the back there. Now here I've tried to push the branch down. There's this side branch which later on will help with the profile. This still needs to go back, but here in the top I want to let this branch grow out. It sits in a reasonable place. I'm just going to wire the first couple of inches. And at the same time, this branch I'm going to really pull down a little bit as a back branch so it doesn't compete with development. But all in all, this top is reasonable and it's just going to have a long pin for a while because I want this to really pick up as the main branch. And as I said, this needs to go a little bit more into the back and down. And with that, I think this first styling of this olive is done. Thank you for watching. This is Jelle from Bonsai. See you next time. This will now go back into the garden. It will get sun, fertilizer, water, and I'll just allow it to grow for quite a bit of time. I want it to really extend, add 4 or 5 inches on every single branch before I do anything else, and then I'll be wiring out the secondaries and filling it up, and hopefully by that time there's going to be less incentive for the tree to start growing from the trunk because it's going to get darker on the trunk, and with that there's less light. Hopefully then there's also enough foliage mass here on these branches to stop it from popping buds again.